make that trigger happen like 5 or 6 times. I think when you read a card like that, just the fact that we're getting a question about that card at all makes me think that it's accomplishing its goal. Like, oh, this is a fun and interesting card where I'm going to try to figure out something to do with it. I think that it probably shouldn't be the most popular or most powerful deck, but we just have a lot of cards that just are fun for people to figure out different things to do with and just have a good time.
All right. From Levi1147 from Twitter, what do you guys consider a healthy meta, and how do you measure it, and what warning signs would alert you if it wasn't healthy?
We look at a ton of different metrics. A lot of it is feel. We play, everyone plays a ton of Hearthstone. Like, we're playing hundreds and hundreds of games a month, basically everybody. So getting a good gauge from what's going on from the community, what we feel personally, what we feel when we're talking to each other. We use a ton of metrics as well. Something that I look at consistently is every time we get a report on the metagame, like not necessarily is the highest win rate. Like, in the history of Hearthstone, there's been very, very few decks that have ever eclipsed the win rate that is, I would consider dangerous, like something over like 55% even. That's happened very, very rarely, but what does happen sometimes is the population of decks increase to an amount that's like 20-25%, and that's really counter to a lot of our goals, where when we want you to queue up on Ladder and Tavern Brawl and in Constructed, we want you to have a different experience. We don't want you to just feel like you're doing the same thing over and over again. So a lot of times we're looking at population at different ranks. Like, we have the ability to look at what's going on in Legend, what's going on from ranks 1 to 5, what's going on at rank 20. When I queue into those experiences, am I experiencing something different? A lot of times when I queue in.
Or like, what's specifically Sixo playing? Like, what's he playing?
Oh,
What's his win rate with each deck?
Also that as well. That doesn't really correlate to a healthy metagame, but it is nice to see that. So when things are getting to too high of a population, I think that's when we consider, like, there's something wrong here. Maybe we could step in. When we change things like Undertaker, I mean, it was because between Warlock and Hunter, it was like 40% of games were Undertaker Hunter, and while that deck was powerful, the bigger problem was the population size. So I think that's really the biggest thing that we look at in terms of healthy meta. Are there a lot of decks being played? Does it feel different when I'm playing games?
And those are correlated, right? The better the win percentage, the more likely people are to jump on that train and play that deck. There is some counter to that, which is that as the deck gets more popular, people are playing cards that are very good against that deck and can bring the win rate back down. With Undertaker Hunter, that there wasn't enough cards, I think, in the meta that were very good against that deck even. So I think it's a little bit on us to make sure there are cards in the meta that are playable. If there is a deck that is starting to run rampant, that you could feel like, okay, I'm smart, I'm paying attention, I can tune my deck against that. So that's something that we need to continue to do to make those kinds of tools.
Right. There's examples of that, like, fairly recently. Like, the population of Aggro Warrior was extremely high, like higher or just as high as any deck has basically ever been in Hearthstone for a couple days, and then people started playing more of the Kazakus and Reno decks and putting Doomsayers and Acidic Swampoos and stuff in their deck, and the population size of that deck moved drastically. And that's really healthy for us, for there to be something that's very powerful, and then the community sort of figures it out on their own, which is more of an organic meta shift rather than us saying, oh, this is too powerful, let us, we'll come in and stomp on this. We'd much rather things shift on their own and players figure out different ways, because there are all these tools, and that's really the goal that we have.
All right. Kabloey from Twitch chat. What card from Mean Streets has been the most surprising from internal testing to how it is being utilized now?
Wow, that's an interesting question. I don't know exactly. We did a lot of play testing, so a lot of things. I guess one of the most surprising things is how well some things worked out. I guess this isn't really going to answer this question, but when we tested Cthulhu, like the Cocoon Aviana Cthulhu Druid, that's the kind of deck that we test a ton, because when you're essentially one-shotting your opponent, that's something that's a little bit worrisome for us. So when we printed Coon, we just said, well, there's an Aviana combo and there's a Malagos combo, and like how powerful is that? Like, it's a fun thing to do, but if it becomes too popular, if it's too strong, then I would consider that something very bad. That you're just like holding all these cards back and then destroying your opponent, doing 50 damage
out of the hand with nothing in the battlefield.
Right, yeah. Right. But it is super fun to think about. It's super fun to build. So like, how do you strike a balance between, like, we want this to be exactly this tier of deck? Any better or any worse is a big problem. But it was such a fun thing that we put in a ton of time in testing that particular deck, and I think it got to a point where it almost got to the point where it was being played a lot, and then it's like, oh, it's not quite good enough. So I think it was surprising how well that worked out. I guess the population of the pirate decks was not, I would say, unexpected, but how well that really worked out in Shaman, Warrior, and Rogue. Versus, like, we knew it was a very strong Warrior deck, but mixing all the Jade things in with Pirates, I think was slightly stronger than we anticipated. So that was, like, slightly surprising. Patches appearing everywhere was kind of in those 3 decks with weapon classes. I consider that a win. I mean, if you're with Small Time Buccaneer and Patches, and you're playing those in 3 different decks that have weapons, then that's great for us. I think the power level might be slightly too high, but in terms of like where those cards are getting played, I think that's great.
All right, Messner C from Twitter, are you satisfied with the current state of Wild? I think there's some stuff that we could do better with Wild. I think one of the things that is going to be best for Wild is the next standard rotation. Right now, Wild is 2 sets off from standard. There's not. Some of the cards in those sets are pretty impactful, but it'll be 5 sets off from Wild in the upcoming rotation as 1 new set gets added to standard and Wild, and 3 new sets leave the standard format. So to me, that's very exciting. I think there are lots of decks and strategies that will be only achievable in Wild, and I think that'll increase the demand for more Wild type stuff in the community, which means we probably need to do more Wild type things on our end. I really hope, and I was kind of surprised not to see more of this, I hope to see we've seen a lot of great community events over the last year. Firebat through some incredible tournaments, and we've seen other really exciting tournaments throughout the community. I was hoping to see a little bit more Wild stuff, but there hasn't been a lot of that kind of activity. So maybe that's something that we need to do more of to kind of spark some of that. I do think, though, that as the demand for cool Wild stuff goes up, as the Wild gets more different, that will hopefully encourage some of that stuff. But I think we'll see what happens after this next rotation. I think it'll be such a different experience that hopefully it really feels like 2 unique formats that are totally legit. I mean, we're seeing a lot of players playing in Wild. I think probably more than people would expect. It's not like 10% of the numbers of players who are playing in Standard. It's like I don't know. Standard maybe is like twice as popular as Wild or something like that. I haven't looked at the numbers recently. So it's there are players playing Wild, and there are players hitting Legend in Wild and all that. So I think that there's some success there, and we'll see how things change. I think it will change dramatically after the next rotation.
Yeah, metagame-wise, things, even though the sets actually aren't too much different, like I'm saying, there's only Nax and Goblins vs. Gnomes that are different, but the Wild metagame has been shifting a lot recently. Like the introduction of Kazakus alone has made a lot of people play a version of the Kazakus and Reno deck in Wild, which is much, much different than the version that people are playing in Standard. I think that there's a lot of times there's 10, 11 cards different because a lot of the cards in Naxxramas and Goblins vs. Gnomes are quite powerful. I think that I saw some concern about, there's cards like Paladin Shredder and Dr. Boom, and aren't you guys concerned about the Wild balance? Like, why aren't these cards being changed? I think that over time, as the card pool gets bigger, you're just going to see the really powerful decks in Wild are the decks that have a ton of synergy, and not necessarily the decks that are just playing a bunch of powerful standalone cards. So I think that Ben's right. When the next rotation happens and the 2 formats are much, much different, and one experience is much different than the other, I think that'll do a lot of things for the population of Wild and people having more fun. And when I'm done with Standard for the day, I've played a bunch of Constructed. Right now, when going to play Wild, it's not necessarily that different of an experience. Whereas I think when it becomes a much different experience, it'll become a mode that you're more excited to play.
All right. From Time Bandit. Hi, Ben Brode. I'm the guy who accidentally sent you my linguistics book. First off, thanks for sending it back. This is very appreciated. Now, what did you actually learn from it, except that there's a page 477 in it? So the whole team wrote all over Time Bandit's book. And there's I changed all the periods to commas, and on the first page, not in the whole book. And then we took it around campus and posed with it and took pictures. So it was a lot of fun. Thank you for lending us your linguistics book. I didn't get a chance to read all the chapters, so please send it back. Okay, next question. At KMT from Twitter says, are you concerned by some wording inconsistency? Do you plan to rewrite old cards? The short answer is yes and yes. So we have been doing it. So in a lot of patches, I think basically every major expansion release, we've gone back and edited wordings, changed punctuation on overload cards. We've even also reflowed the way that text flows to reduce orphans or just to make things more readable. I tend to like to see when it's like +2 attack. Like I like it when it's +2 attack on the same line, not +2 with an attack on the next line. So I'm actually very picky about this stuff. It matters a lot to me and to a lot of the team. So we have been changing a lot of that stuff. I think recently there's been a big example with Druid of the Claw. I did make a video a long time ago explaining why it wasn't more consistent with the Druid cards in the past. We've had discussions about that recently. Do you know the current status of Druid of the Claw?
I do not personally. I know that we have a guy named Ryan Masterson. You guys know him as Reels. He's super passionate about this stuff. I think he's back at his desk right now working on templates, making sure there's no orphaned words and the new stuff that's coming out. So I think that we're dedicating a lot of time to making sure a lot of these text boxes look the way they should, and also that they're consistent with past and present things in the set. So I think it's something that we're looking at and taking seriously.
I have not been involved recently in those conversations, but I know they've happened. So we'll kind of take a look and see where we're at with that. But I don't disagree that that's potentially a better direction for Druid of the Claw. I do think I should say that I think that consistency is better. It's better if cards are consistent. But unlike physical games, I don't think it's the prime concern. An example is a card like Ysera, who if you were playing that card let's say we made physical Hearthstone, and you drew that card, you were like, okay, get a dream card. What does that mean? I can't play the game anymore. Like we have to stop, or we have to go get Google and figure out how to what the text actually means. So that isn't an issue. It means we can make cards like Fireball that just say deal 6 damage. To what? What do you like? So you don't have to say any of that. We just highlight the possible targets, right? So I think that being ultra clear on the cards, when we can do it and it doesn't have other drawbacks, that's really important. We should do it. But sometimes there are other drawbacks. There are other things that we think, there's some, if we made it exactly the same, it reads crappily. There's 18 lines of text. Let's just come up with some other way to say it. As long as it parses very easily, you read it one time and you get it, you understand how it's supposed to work, or your intuition kind of gets you there. I think that's very important too. And usually that all aligns. Usually we make cards consistent and parsable and all the other things that we're looking for. Sometimes that breaks down, and we just say, okay, normally triggers say whenever blank happens, comma, do X. But then sometimes we say, this destroys minions that it damages. And you're like, okay, I get it. I don't need you to write it the same way we've written every other card. That's much more parsable. It's easier to get from what you're trying to say to what it actually means. So sometimes we sort things slightly differently. It's just a kind of a card-by-card basis, and when we think how much we gain from consistency versus how much we gain from some of the other things that can fight against it. Okay. Ornrock from the blog asks, can you talk about your design goals for the Paladin class? Paladin identity seems unclear, and I would love to know Blizzard's thoughts on what it should do and where it goes from here.
Sure, I can talk about that. Paladin itself is... Paladin has 2 different things that we sort of go for. There's... they're very good at healing. They have cards like Ragnar's Lightlord and Forbidden Healing, and cards that we continue to make where they can get to later stages of the game fairly easily, or easier than other classes can. And also they have their hero power, which is summon a Silverhand Recruit. So in general, we've had a lot of different Paladin decks that either go very long game and use stuff like Equality and Consecrate and heal and sort of survive until they can play some of these giant minions like Tyrion and Ragnar's Lightlord, Or we have another version of Paladin decks that's I summon all of my silver hand recruits, and then I go to battle with these tiny guys and buffs. And so I think with Paladin we do more buffs than we do in any other class. Cards like Blessing of Kings and cards like that are cards that you're likely to see in sets going forward. So cards that synergize with if I am buffed, maybe I am better than the average card being buffed. Cards that synergize with cards like Blessing of King and just more later game cards that help Paladin heal. So I think that when Reno rotates out specifically, Paladin will be one of the classes that's going to be the best at healing again. So I think that there's a lot of room for Paladin to be very successful when that comes around. And also, I think in the future that we'll continue to do stuff that deal with silver hand recruits, deal with buffing, and also deal with healing. And that's sort of the identity for Paladin.
All right, another question here, and I gotta say, I don't know if this is a sample bias because we're getting the questions that are like this and not all the questions they're asking. But there aren't a lot of questions being asked about, hey, when are you going to implement X feature that I think would be cool? And that's helpful because a lot of the times, like we can't talk about this thing that we're not ready to announce or is far enough in the future that we haven't discussed a lot of things yet. So I appreciate not asking us questions that the only possible answer from us is a non-answer. We're excited about. We have a lot of stuff coming. 2017 is an exciting year for Hearthstone, but it's harder to answer those kinds of questions in a format like this where we're not just going to announce everything. Right?
Yeah, this format's more about like communication. Like, what are the hot topics? What are the questions that you guys have been asking? How can we give some insight into that, and how can we collect feedback from you guys rather than this is the next expansion or like this is the next feature that we're releasing. So especially if we do this more and more often. We announced some stuff today, but I mean, imagine in a world where we did this every week or every 2 weeks, we're not going to be able to have like the next feature that we're releasing every time we do this. So it's good for us to have sort of an open line of communication and be on places like Reddit and Twitter and also do stuff like this that's wider reaching. So I think that setting the expectation where we're just having a conversation about Hearthstone and addressing some of these topics that you guys are concerned about, I think is what you can expect from things like this in the future.
All right, I'm being told that we're running right up against time, so I wanted to kind of close things out by talking a little bit about this whole thing. Do you guys like this, right? Do you feel like this is valuable? Does it help knowing how we feel about things, even when we're not communicating announcements and action plans? In these in-between times where we're not ready to announce something, but we think it's important to have a conversation and a dialogue, do you like this format? Do you like live video Q&As? Let us know what you thought about this whole thing. Let us know if there's any specific answers that we gave that you think are just the wrong things for us to be doing. We're not going to make everybody happy, and we're not going to always make the right decision. We're going to make some mistakes. So it's a little tough to kind of sift through it and figure out, okay, really, based on this feedback, where do we go from here? But it's very important. It is a thing that we use as one of our primary inputs for deciding what to do on Hearthstone and how to make decisions. So please let us know how you felt. Let us know in general senses of making threads on our forums, on Reddit, or you can let us know personally. Our Twitter handles are right there, how you felt about all of this. So, Play Hearthstone on Twitter is a good place for community feedback. They also compile all that and send it to us as well. So we'll see all of it. We'll read all of it. And that will wrap it up for our first ever Hearthstone live Q&A. How did it feel?
It was fun, yeah, and also, like Ben said, feel free to leave feedback on any of the answers that we gave as well. Hopefully we can give added context to those if anyone is upset with any of those answers. But it was great. I'm really glad to have done this. So.
I clicked the button too early, Dean. There it is.
Oh, no. Oh, what is this?
Thanks for joining us, guys. Bye.